November. No matter the outcome, we will elect our 47th chief executive. But first, we're going to take a look back at how the presidents became president. This is your countdown to 47. Next is Tricky Dick, Richard Milhous Nixon. Prior to becoming the 37th president, Nixon attended Duke Law School, where he graduated in 1937. In 1942, Nixon joined the U.S. Naval Reserve, and a year after that, Nixon volunteered for sea duty, becoming a lieutenant commander serving in the Pacific. At the end of the war, Nixon was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. Years later, Nixon was elected as a U.S. Senator, where he criticized President Truman's handling of the Korean War and warned of a growing communist threat. This caught the eye of General Dwight Eisenhower, who chose Nixon as his running mate on the Republican ticket in 1952. They won that November. After serving with distinction as vice president for 8 years, Nixon ran for the high office for himself, winning the Republican nomination. He went on to face Democrat John F. Kennedy in the general election. The pair engaged in a series of televised debates. Nixon lost the election to Kennedy by just 118,000 votes. This defeat was followed by another in 1962 when he lost his gubernatorial bid in California, leaving Nixon to remark that his political career was over. After a respite from politics, Nixon began speaking publicly about U.S. foreign policy, most notably America's involvement in Vietnam. This won him the support of the Republican Party once more. In 1968, he made a bid for the high office once again. With a chaotic showing from the Democrats, Nixon won the election that November. He then became the 37th President of the United States. Now the chief executive, Nixon sought to end the Vietnam War and called on the silent majority of Americans to support his policy of a negotiated peace and Vietnamization, which transferred the burden of war on South Vietnam as the U.S. gradually withdrew, which they eventually did by 1973. In 1972, President Nixon made 2 prominent visits overseas in an effort to relieve Cold War tensions. He first visited China and met with communist leaders, ushering in an era of cooperation between the nations. Months later, he traveled to Moscow and met with Soviet leadership, where they negotiated the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, formalizing nuclear weapons limitation between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. That same year, Nixon ran for re-election. While he won that November, a break-in at the Democratic National Committee offices at the Watergate Hotel in June was the beginning of the end for the Nixon presidency. Continued controversy mired Nixon's second term. In 1973, his vice president, Spiro Agnew, had resigned from his office due to his own scandals, leading to the appointment of Michigan Representative Gerald Ford in accordance with the 25th Amendment. By 1974, President Nixon had become implicated in the cover-up of the Watergate scandal, and impeachment seemed inevitable. So, on August 8th, President Nixon announced his resignation from office.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office.
Richard Nixon served as President of the United States from 1969 until his resignation from office in 1974. It was now up to the newly sworn-in President Ford to lead the nation through this tumultuous time. I'm Eric George for Valley News Live, and this has been your countdown to 47.